Recording, recording. Hey everyone, welcome to another Destiny Movie Night Hangout. I'm your host here with Marlen. Actually, we've changed the format slightly. Hey Marlen. So me and Marlen are both hosts now. So this is a creative collaborative effort. So me and Marlen are your hosts here. Welcome Marlen, and
Co-hosting for sure.
thank you for signing on to co-host this with me. I think this is a cool direction moving forward for the Hangouts. So,
Awesome, yeah.
yeah, cool. So, yeah, everyone, the Hangout we have here for today is on the movie The Accountant. Um, New movie. I'm not even going to explain the whole movie for anyone who hasn't seen it. We're just going to start talking about it and bringing it back to ourselves, points that opened up for each of us individually, and see where the conversation takes us. So I picked this movie for the Hangout today because I found there to be a lot of cool points in terms of walking the Destiny I process that I found reflect back in a lot of very cool ways that were very structured in their approach. Because if we look at the main character, who is an accountant, he's very specific in his applications. And we see right in the beginning him as like a little boy, and he's challenged basically by his environment. How he acts out is different, is a bit unusual in how he's processing all the stimulation in his environment, like how he's physically stimulated within his environment. Like he would maybe be moving his hands or like shaking like a little bit, which is interesting in and of itself because when we're new into this world, we're more, in a way, sensitive to all the stimulation that's happening in our environment. We're more moldable in reflecting our environment in different ways and how we develop. So in early in the movie, the parents are concerned about their child, the accountant, and how he's developing as a child. And they're concerned, and the doctor explains to him, like, well, no, he's just, basically processing his environment differently than you or me, but it's very much the same point in terms of processing. And, reflecting that to the Destiny I process, that's process. It's all about process, who we are in relationship to everything else here. It's removing the separation, the dissonance. So an interesting point comes up from the doctor to the parents, where they say to him, like, well, he could just stay with me for like a long while and we could create this very sheltered environment so he doesn't have so much stimulation. And right away, the dad, who came from a very disciplined, structured background as a military man, said, no, that's not going to help my son to the best of his potential. And here's why he said that. His reasoning was such that, if he's super sensitive to stimulation, he needs to be in environments where he's very much stimulated and engaged, because that's how he's going to be able to be most effective in this world, is if he knows and understands how to manage his environment in the most effective, practical ways. And from there, we see a whole array of ways in which the father challenged him in his development, to the point where he became, very superior in his capacity to perform a whole array of tasks. And it was based on this point of structure that was introduced early on, where, he could look at things in the sense of accounting for different variables. It's like doing the math on different scenarios as like equations, like, here's the problem. Okay, how do we solve it? How do I walk this? How do we create the solution, live the solution? And so, yeah, he became very effective. So this is like what interested me so much about the movie. And it showed it in so many ways and just kind of kept going. And I was like, oh, it's just so perfect. Marlen, I know when I brought this up to you, saying like, "Hey, I think this movie is amazing. Everybody should watch this for process. So cool." You're like, "Yeah, I watched it, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, what?"
Yeah, I was completely like, okay, what aspects are you really going to bring through? I mean, what kind of was interesting to me is the attitude of the guy, the accountant, and um, that sense of like people perceiving him as being different, being kind of autistic, not following social norms. Of course, I'm talking more about when he's an older guy and everything. And I kind of reflected back to myself sometimes, um, but also people that I relate to very closely that can be like that a little bit, where people kind of look at them and they see that they don't react in the usual social manners, like being very affable, but can be very focused and very concentrated into something and be very effective in doing something very specific, but not follow the usual social norms, for example. And this is where where I saw this interesting notion of what does it mean to be normal in that sense, and how much there is like this quick way in which we jump into judgments. For example, when he was interacting with the lady accountant in that company that he was working for, how one as a viewer can also in some moments start like judging the guy in a way like, why is he behaving like that? Why is he not smiling back? Why is he not like communicating like a normal person? But what is normal anyways? And this movie definitely makes you kind of create like an opening for considering a person with what I would call is, sure, not the normalcy, but normalcy as in following the social ways of socializing, of how we're, prone to follow the ways to be affable and be, open, things like that. But many times we're quick to judge. Like I saw myself more in while watching the movie, a little bit more in that sense of recognizing that pattern of how people can be a little bit more closed up, but at the same time kind of saying, well, he's definitely not normal. He must have something off in him. And so in that judgment, we create this separation, of course. We lose out the opportunity to actually get to know someone, for example, just because we could be so quick to say, oh, he's just weird. He doesn't talk like normal people, or he doesn't laugh, or he doesn't do chit-chatting, And to me, that was very interesting that it was portrayed and in a sense of showing his actual capabilities, which were quite astounding, in fact. And that in terms of autism, if it was such a thing, there are such cases where we see that people have these like very special capacities that we would disregard just because of how they behave on a superficial way. But it also shows how each person, regardless of how we would like the normalcy to be, that each person has a specific point, purpose, gift, if you will, regardless of how we would be quick to judge them. So yeah, it was interesting in that sense, I would say.
Cool. What's your take on the leading actress in the movie, the other accountant, the female accountant?
Well, in a sense, it was cool to see that she pushed through maybe her same judgments as the ones that I probably was having while watching the guy in the movie, and that she kind of, pushed the point, like, okay, I'm going to talk to this guy and I'm going to open up a conversation and kind of start accepting or making space for a person like that, or being willing to open up. And the relationship that they develop eventually kind of shows that even if he never showed like this typical romantic scene that everyone expects in these kind of movies, there was some sort of opening for him. And for a person like that, it is very difficult, usually very tough, to get to any form of like intimacy, for example. And she was able to kind of assist him in doing that. So I'm more kind of related to that person, like her, that assists the other guy that is a little bit autistic in kind of opening up. So I could see myself in that, which is very enjoyable as well, in terms of seeing someone opening up little by little in some form of expression, even if they're like regularly serious. Like my partner is a little bit like that guy, actually. So that's what kind of brought me back to myself, in a sense of, the lady, you know, she kept pushing and opening up and little by little getting something out of it. So that was interesting. What's your take on her? What did you see in her?
Well, to me, it really kind of showcased the different dynamics on like the base construction of like a man in comparison to a woman, as like the basic physical structure design, where she embodied more the creativity and the flow. And we saw that like in how she pushed those points of engagement with him, even though, you know, it could be regarded as like awkward or, you know, challenging, because he was very just like systematic and being like very physically structured, on point in terms of like, you know, application, you know, execution, so to speak. And if it wasn't part of the plan, he wasn't, you know, deviating from the script, so to speak. But at the same time, what I found it to be like a cool collaboration, so to speak, with the two of them, because, you know, when brought to a point of engagement by like her pushing him, and in pushing him in the sense of just kind of including herself into his world by like asking questions,
Like making herself some space and being
exactly,
the directive one, which is a cool thing, you know. I've heard
big
so
time.
many women saying, oh, I would never be the one to start a conversation with a guy if I'm interested or whatever. And I'm like, why not? I mean, if you're interested in, just make yourself present, you know. So it is breaking that kind of paradigm. So that's an interesting point indeed.
Yeah, because what it did showcase with like her, you know, using like her creative flow about opening up points of conversation to break the ice, so to speak, and talking about this or whatever, like surface type stuff. You know, he was in fact rather engaging. The more and more in which he was engaged, so it was like there was that point of reciprocity there. Like at first it's kind of like, well, okay, he's very short, concise with his answer, but the more, you know, the more he's engaged and kind of like the platform of space is created and opened up to open up, he does. And, you know, there's more of a dynamic back and forth in terms of sharing. And I found that to be rather interesting because in a way they were both embodying that very same starting point of like walking process in this world in terms of you know, working within your environment and who's here and what's here, and challenging yourself within that, because we see the woman very much, she faced challenges, you know, within her communication with this guy who was not, you know, quote unquote, you know, normal in terms of just kind of being like an automated talking head, so to speak.
Apparently,
Yeah.
because he was a lot more aware than,
That
and that's also like a false perception, right?
exactly, exactly. um, which is interesting because you see in there that her discomforts within herself were brought through as a result of him being there standing as that point of like strong structured stability, because he was very quiet, you know, chill within himself, so much so that, you know, he wasn't bouncing around and was just like enabling whatever was there to come up And there wasn't anything coming up within him because he was just like very grounded. Like he walked a very disciplined lifestyle, and so I would say the point within himself was quite strong, and just of that point of stability wherever he may go. Like he'd established that within himself. And that, I think, as we can all see in walking the destiny process, is that in standing as a point that can cause rifts within others in your environment, because you may be questioned as like, well, how come you're not reacting, or you're not just going along with the energy that I'm throwing out there? Because that's kind of like, yeah, a point of just chain reactions moving things, instead of it being from that starting point of like self-direction and opening up the expression of ourselves.
Awesome. That's a great way to kind of allow me to see many things now.
Oh,
And you know
cool.
what's interesting is that I actually can relate very much to that relationship now that I'm seeing it, because I very much represent like that wobbly woman that goes around like la 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 la, and being with a partner that is like so serious and like stern and not showing so much emotion. And I walk through that process of being the one that starts the conversations, the talking, and over time, like little by little, developing that expression from a person that didn't have that, like, very much to like the guy in the movie, in fact. And I have had to precisely face that point of kind of feeling like the monkey that moves around from side to side, while the other person is just stern and serious. So I can very much relate to that, and I know that it does take not giving up on a person like that, not giving up on a short answer, or believing that they're always pissed because they are this stern and serious person, when in fact, no, that is also an expression and the of emotions and feelings and highs, but it doesn't mean that they're not enjoying themselves, for example. So I've been learning a lot type of person, in fact, and it has been challenging for me, of course, because I think that also as women we tend to be more emotional, like more into the feelings and things like that. So when you deal with a person that is not so much into that, or doesn't even have a background or past construct on that in this life, my own patterns were really challenged, in the sense of having to start enjoying himself. Is he sick of me already? So I would go and ask him those things like, what's going on in you? And that's how I also started to realize that no, he just doesn't react the same way that I would react. And I know when he reacts, things like that, you get to know through, as the lady did, kind of pushing through and communicating and not giving up on the first signs of the person, like not reacting as expected. But it's also very cool then, also relating to process, in my case, having to push my own boundaries in terms of what I expected as an expression in a person, having to push through that and eventually be developing that expression and communication over time. It's not easy. And then at the same time, as you were mentioning, with process, how oneself also becomes that more stable point with other people, for example. And they might say like, how come you're not so angry or so sad about this? Well, I understand this, and I have come to work with. Okay, you went out for a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but
Okay, so I was saying that it becomes a little shocking for people to face a protagonist like him in a way. because of how he is. So
Right.
it is becomes a challenge for us as a viewer as well. So
A point of compliment to that, I would say, is when you really much you very much mentioned the point of how we have to give the other person a chance, and in giving that other person the chance, we're in self giving ourself a chance, like that willingness to really take the time for ourself to open up with that other person. Because what that shows, when there's like a resistance there of not wanting to give another person the time of day, it's we're not really giving ourselves the time of day to open up and question our own like conditioned way of thinking and looking at things, like our very design of relationships. And in a way, it really showcases that point of, relation fuck ups, really, in a way, where it's like when we're, not willing to work with someone or whatnot, or get to know them and see where they're at, and just quick to write it off, it's showcasing those points of suppression within ourselves. So yeah, that's cool how you really went into that there.
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I've personally been so many times, I mean, before we kind of formalize the whole relationship, so many times where I was like, I mean, this is done. There's no point in continuing this communication. It's going nowhere. But I kept pushing. So it's very interesting to see how, before the Hangout, I was like, I really don't know what I'm going to be talking about in this movie. So it's cool that you brought up this dimension to it, that it is there, we can talk about it, yet so many times like we watch the movie more in another kind of dimension or context, and maybe missing out some of these things. So this is the marvel of doing movie hangouts as well.
Totally. Yeah, I love movies for that point, and even series as well, because it's interesting, because there's so much education to be garnered from anything you watch, really, because it's a point of like mirrored reflection. So it's like what you pick up on, reflects you, to you, and in all sorts of ways. Like you can use reactions as a tool to like aid you in your reflection and your awareness, where okay, I'm having, a strong opinion that comes up within me based on somebody doing, this or whatever. And so that opens up questions to go. And also even, the other ways where it's just you see some things you really like. Well, let's give more words to that. What is it you really like? What's happening here? And let's go into that and see what that's all about. And yeah.
Also, another point is that, like here, we're not talking about the actual story that is presented of the accountant and what he is and the double life that he leads or whatever.
Right.
But we're kind of focusing on very, like intrinsic aspects that are there all the time. But like in my case, I got a little bit more lost into trying to make sense of the story and the details. And that's when we also miss out this kind of very meaningful aspects that we can learn from. So very cool for also opening them up as well.
That's an interesting point you bring up, just about the story, or like following the story, so to speak, because yeah, I was reading through some of the structural resonance documents yesterday, specifically on the point of the occipital
Occipital.
occipital. Yeah, it's a new word for me. It's one I haven't used so much. Anyways, on those 2 points, basically your matrix plug-in points at the back. And yeah, within that document, the point was brought more to the forefront of my attention about how basically within and as consciousness, that's a point that each of us looks to exhibit, take on, is our individual story, where we have certain memories, certain pictures, certain things that are like highlighted based on, well, the impressions we create towards those particular events in our life that, well, basically create the framework and construction of our, mind story, so to speak, because it's based on the specifics of how we've individually personified ourselves, from the construction of our, mother and father, taking some of their characteristics of each of them and then believing ourselves to be, this separate, unique individual, when the truth of it is like we're a copy of our parents, and we've just picked and choose certain personality traits and made that, our character construction story. Yeah, so you bring up the point of like following along the story here. That's something I was also reflecting upon, how often I've done just within my own life, of like, what's the narrative or the story here I'm creating, or like, what do I tell others like about me is like my story kind of thing. And it's interesting, like when we, watch movies or shows, and we have certain preferences sometimes towards particular stories because they, either they gel with the story we're trying to live or would like to live or interested in living, or it's not. Maybe we won't go there in question. And again, that's why I think there's so much insight and reflection and learning potential from pretty much everything you watch.
Agreed. And this is something that for me will also be like a challenge to be co-hosting here, because I'm not the person that watches so many movies. Lately, I've been picking it up a bit more, but in the past years, it was almost like a thing that I just gave up on. Like, I don't need to watch that. I don't need to watch TV. I watch very little amount of series, things like that. So these also kind of pushes not only me but also for anyone watching to learn how to see things in a more deep way that can be very supportive, and learning from others and characters and human nature in that way, and reflecting it back to ourselves to see, well, what do I have to change within myself in relation? How am I reacting to this? How can I relate to this? So just like it happened today. So thanks, Mike, for that as well.
Very cool, Marlen. Very, very cool. Um, was there something you mentioned briefly before we started the hangout, about the end of the movie? Was there something you wanted to ask me or say?
Well, it is more related to the story in itself.
That's fine.
What I would say to people is, when watching this movie, then take into consideration that, which in the sense of the plot, yes, it's entertaining, things like that, but there's definitely a lot more to see in the character, the life itself, the attitudes. I really think I'm not usually the person that praises people for playing particular characters, but this character that Ben Affleck played was, to me, was quite well done. In my mind, I was almost like, when is he going to smile? Which is interesting, like expecting, which also tells a lot about me, when and also what I have worked on, which is when seeing a stern face, is like, I want them to smile and open up, and like my own desire in a way, and how it gets challenged. And he has been very supportive for me as well, to kind of let go of expectations, learn to deal with people that are not going to be expressing themselves as I expect them, yet that they're here and enjoying themselves, but not in a visible manner as I do, for example, like smiling, things like that. And he was very much like that in that character. So I found that like very challenging as well to watch, in the sense of my expectations. But it was a very, very well played role, I'd say. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much so. That's a big part of why I thought this movie was so cool, because of the specificity in the characters, like basically that went into it in, you know, creating this story. And I think that's like a cool thing to look at, well, within any story, because it's based on the characters within the story, and we can always reflect that back to ourselves and seeing how, you know, we go into different characters based on reactions that we go into or whatnot, and then also even just getting into the core of ourself and looking at how we, you know, cherry picked our own character design personality as, you know, this unique mind consciousness system, you know, because it's very specific, and it's based on impressions we form to particular bits of information, relationships along the way. So it's yeah, really, it's a great point of support for walking the destiny process is in watching series and movies. I mean, it's kind of like you want to push your process, watch the movies, and really go into writing self-reflection about it.
And you know, also another point, that whenever finding people like this in a reality, for example, with my family, I had to do a lot of talking as to be able to understand another, that it's just like that. It's not like the usual social butterfly as what my family are used to, what we culturally here in Mexico are used to. And it was also a very cool process for me, my family, everyone to, for example, with my partner, that is a little bit like that. And to give ourselves that opportunity of little by little giving room to that expression to develop to a point of actual comfort and enjoyment right now. So this was also like an extended process of, through me making that decision of kind of bringing this kind of personality into the family, that at first it was like a shock, really, like what the hell. And over time it has been quite a cool opening, but it also, I recognize that it was because I did my own work. I did the own talking, explanation, like give space to this point to develop expression and open up little by little, understand context. And that's so essential with anyone, essentially, in this world, to not be quick to make judgments or expectations about how they should be in social situations or meeting someone, and rather be the one that pushes, that stands and opens up the questions and communication. And that's so much more gratifying, really, to be honest, to do that, to be that one, if you see that there's something more there.
Yes. Yes, questioning what comes up within ourselves, for sure. Yeah,
And challenging it,
yeah,
challenging ourselves, and how to relate to people that are not exactly replying to us the expected way, you know. That's also very cool.
big time. Because yeah, what opens up is so much. Like I have a personal example I can give here as well, where I was looking at specific points of life direction in terms of you know, career, points of career in terms of working in this world. And initially, you know, I started with like a sort of very polarized way of looking at things, like, oh, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to do this. And it was like the points were verses, like, well, I can't do both. And then it was like, well, why not? Maybe I could do this part of the year and I could do this another part of the year. And then from there it was like, okay, like, well, what about, you know, if I was doing this and maybe I could even complement something else to go in between those 2 points that were seasonal points of work I was looking at. And then from there opened up, you know, questions even about, well, what else could I do to even maybe further myself along within this industry while still focusing on this industry for part of the year, and, you know, creating like this harmonious juggling balance where there's many moving parts, but I'm directing them all and I'm making them all fit into my life as different points of complement, which was a huge change from thinking like, no, I have to just pick this, all or nothing, or this, and then that's it. I just focus totally on that. That's my life. That's it. Instead of it, well, it was only as a result of challenging challenging myself within my relationships on those particular points and seeing what could come of it. And I didn't know what could come of it before I totally went there in the challenge. And that's, you know, can be seen as like a scary thing or whatnot, because you don't know how it's going to go, so to speak, because you haven't done that before and it's new. But what's super cool about it is that all sorts of potential opens up in terms of like avenues and directions that you can take and different things you can play with. And it's just so amazing, because it's like we're giving ourselves access to play with more things that we like by allowing ourselves to open up and challenge essentially our own limitations that come up within our mind.
Fully agree with that, and very much aligned to this whole challenging our definition, our personalities, our likes, what we expect, what we like, and rather testing it out and see what practically works out, no, for you in that case.
Totally.
Cool.
Any final words, Marlen, or are you happy with how things have kind of come together here?
No, it's been actually very cool. I'm more like surprised of all the stuff that I actually had, like personal share here this time, very much opened up that I haven't seen. I kind of had the glimpse of it while watching the movie, like, this guy kind of looks like, you know. But I before doing this hangout, I never considered that I was going to be talking about this. So it's also cool to do it in the moment and see what opens up. And
nice.
This is the result.
Awesome. Well, more to come with you and me here. I
For sure
look forward to what we will unravel, open up next. And
if someone also wants to join in to suggest any movie, let us know through the DIP Light page on Facebook, or contact us directly, Mike or Marlen, and we will be looking forward to it.
That's exactly right, everyone. Don't be shy. You are very much welcome to include yourself with a recommendation, or even coming on and sharing as well. We're open to the possibilities here. So yeah, please do share. Awesome. All right, I think we're good here for today.
That's a wrap.
All right, so stay tuned. Check the DIP page, folks, for updates to see what's coming out next. And yeah, this is an M&M production, Marlen Mike production. All right.
They don't melt in your hand, they melt in your mind.
Okay, thanks.
Bye, guys.
See you, everyone.